Welcome to the Centerville.
Not yet. Red light. There you go.
Welcome to the Centerville City Council meeting of October 2nd, 2018. Council meeting's now in session. Why we are getting a little late start is before this meeting we had a participating work session where we went and looked at some playgrounds with us working on our Island View playground and some pickleball courts over in the Farmington area. And we played some pickleball as well too. In fact, Mackenzie, our city recorder, said to me, how should she dress last week? And I said, you gonna play? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay, then dress to win because I'm playing to win. And she says, can't you just play to have fun? And I said, you can do both. But it was both, right, Mackenzie?
Yeah, but you still won.
So welcome everybody that's here. Let's start with a roll call vote, starting with Councilwoman Fillmore.
Fillmore here.
Yent's here.
Meekum here.
Ivy here.
McEwen present.
Let it be noted that all 5 council members are here tonight. We will start with a prayer thought by Councilman Ince.
I don't want to take a long time thinking about thoughts. We have all seen in some of the meetings that we have some of the animosities and difficulties that we are seeing so dramatically displayed on stage at the national level with the Kavanaugh hearings. And I'm not going to try to pass judgment on who's right and who's wrong, but I would make a plea to us and to all Centerville citizens to recognize the blessings we have living in this country, the power of cooperation, and the responsibility to recognize the right of each person to their opinions, whether they agree with ours or not. And with that, our Father which art in heaven, we bow our heads before thee this evening as we begin this city council meeting. We are thankful, Father, for thy love and for the opportunity to live in this great community. We are thankful for the people who surround us. We pray that as we contemplate the business of the people in the city this evening, that we will have thy Spirit to be with us, that we will use good judgment, that we will be respectful of all parties, and that we will be guided in the decisions that we make. We give thanks, Father, and ask for the protection of the first responders who serve us, for we recognize that their lives are put at risk. Pray for all those people in our city who have crucial needs, that someone will step forward and help them, and say these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Councilman Ince. If you would all stand with me and repeat after me the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So now we're at the part on our agenda where this is the open session. This is the part of the meeting where anyone from the public is welcome to come to either of these microphones. And if you do, just state your name and where you're from, and just discuss any matters that might be on your mind. Try and limit it to a couple minutes. So I will now open the open session for anyone that would like to do that. If no responses, then I will close the open session and we'll move on to the business part of the meeting. The first thing on our agenda tonight is minutes review and acceptance. We have 2 meetings, the September 18, 2018 regular meeting minutes and the September 18, 2018 work session minutes. And I would welcome any comments from council members on any changes they see before we take a motion, if any.
I'll move that we approve both sets of those minutes from September 18th.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Move to the second part, the second item on our agenda. This is the renew the street sweeping contract. And I believe we have Dave. Are you going to talk about this for us? We have Dave Walker here from our city to talk about this agenda item. Thanks, Dave.
Good evening. So I just came to talk about this. Historically, we've only had one bidder show up to the last couple times we've put this out to bid. About 8 years ago, we had an extra one there, but the Jaquetta Sweeping still was the successful bidder. They've been working for us for about 8 or 9 years straight now at this point with no hangups. They're agreeing to hold their price, which is extremely competitive. I've spoken with a couple other cities that have just put things out to bid, and they have had bids from a couple other entities, and Jaquetta's still come in very competitively. Their prices are about 10 to 15% higher than we're currently paying, and Jaquetta has agreed to hold their price with us. I reached out to a couple other entities just to see what else they were doing. The bulk of the different cities are going to their own sweeping machines, which for us is not really a practical thing. The machines themselves are about $200,000. You have the maintenance that goes into it, plus then you have to man the machine, which with our current staffing would not be very feasible. So we wanted to go ahead and move forward with renewing with Jaquetta at the current pricing, and we were hoping that we'd be able to leave the option open to be able to renew it again if they agree in another year as well.
So out of curiosity, how much call out do we end up having?
Typically, we may only have 1 or 2 times a year that we end up having to call them out in an emergency situation. It's not as common for us, but
What would be an emergency situation? What would give rise to that?
if we have a larger water leak or some kind of debris movement, some of these larger rainstorms have caused us significant debris coming off of like dirt roads, things of that nature. So we've had them come out, whether it be on a weekend or in a late night situation, to try to get the roads more passable for traffic.
I made the suggestion or comment probably when this was brought up 2 years ago about and because of a faux pas that I made with regard to cyclists, which brings smiles to many people's faces, yours included.
I like biking.
So do I.
I know.
But I brought up a thought about reducing what we do on side streets. My street was done this week. There is no advance notice. I think, as I noted, there were 6 cars on the street, which meant that although he covered the street, he really only covered about half of the street, and that was not his fault. I think we would be better with our money to cover the primary thoroughfares, which is one of the things that cyclists complain about. Have we ever done anything about that?
Yeah, so since those conversations, we did change the way we were doing it. Typically, we were doing just kind of a typical 5 citywide sweeps per year. That was just kind of the norm. Then with the addition of different bike lanes and things like that, then we elected to go to between 3 and 4. A lot of it's weather pending. Some of it has to do with the amount. If we see more debris, then we'll call them in and have more done. But then we have increased our time spent on bike lanes. That does include a couple times that we'll do Main Street as well, which is typically not our responsibility, but in light of the fact that we were encouraging cyclists up onto Main Street. We've just elected to do that a couple times for safety. So we did change and eliminate about 40 to 60 hours of a citywide sweep and move that to more dedicated bike routes and higher profile areas. And we had a few areas that have higher impact, ends of dirt roads, things like that.
Okay.
Not necessarily this year, but would it be where other cities, more cities are buying the street sweepers? Would it be to our financial gain to maybe talk to one of those cities and, you know, borrow it?
There may be a possibility of that. I know that they've had, a long time ago, they went into a couple kind of joint ventures of equipment, and that, if you can imagine, doesn't always work
Right.
out so well.
I was just
As
thinking
far
if we
as,
could
like-
lease one from them, it would help them pay for it, and we could maybe get it cheaper than if we're trying to go through a service.
There is some advantage to that, but at the same time, right now our workforce is
We don't have the
even
manpower.
more reduced than normal. And so to be able to man it, for each one, you're looking, like I say, 40 to 60 man hours spent. So you're talking another 240 to 300 man hours taken away from our other responsibilities. It would be a little taxing on them. And you have training and that would need to take place prior to just throwing somebody into a machine.
More questions for Dave?
I would make a motion that we approve the submitted request for renewal of the renewal of the contract with Jaquetta.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to approve the renewal of the contract for sweeping with Jaquetta Sweeping. Let's do a roll call vote, starting with Councilman McEwen.
Aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. Thanks, Dave.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Good to have you here.
Can I make a comment, Mayor?
You may.
Although the rain hasn't materialized, particularly this afternoon, it was brought to my attention that we were in a flood watch area over the next couple of days. And I got a hold of people to ask if we were making arrangements to check streams, and Dave was already out doing it Monday morning before that got circulated, and would like to say thank you.
And I was impressed by that too, seeing the email correspondence. You'd asked that, and they were already on it, so.
If that rain that
Thank you
came
so
had
much.
lasted very long, we would have had something.
We feel pretty comfortable where we're at, though. Maintenance is good.
Well, maybe, might still come, and we could have a wet fall, and that's been done. Even if we don't, thank you for taking care of that.
We'll just hope that we get it instead of Utah County.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go to item 3 on the agenda, and this is a public hearing regarding zoning text amendments and the sign ordinance amendments to allow murals. And so we will have a presentation by staff, it looks like from Corey Snyder, to start us off on this agenda item. Corey?
Thank you, Mayor. Members of the council, as indicated, this is a proposed text amendment to the zoning ordinance. Just kind of, setting up for the people on YouTube, this is a request to allow murals in some fashion within the city. Just to set back a policy question so you can get the context of what the policy means and how you want to decide its outcome. The municipal code of the city regulates graffiti, and that's a prohibition of graffiti. It is required in the municipal code to be reported to the police department. Police department will work with the Parks Department for its removal, but it also has violations attached with it into the municipal code. On the other hand, you have in the zoning ordinance the issue of regulating signs. How these two relate is where I'm trying to guide you to. Signs in our definition is quite broad. Well, I'll back up. The graffiti is any unauthorized painting that occurs is considered graffiti. So anytime you do unauthorized painting within the city, other than inside your home. Any kind of images and things that you might produce is considered graffiti. Sign ordinance is a pretty broad definition of what constitutes a sign. It is any logo, pattern, colors, whatever it may be that's intended to draw attraction to a place of business, quite broad. Also within the sign ordinance, it repeats that graffiti is a prohibited allowance. And so when we have a discussion about murals, murals involve painting now. And the issue becomes, is a mural a sign or is it a graffiti? If it's unauthorized, it will automatically fall into the constitute a graffiti. If it is authorized, what is that authorization? And that's where the debate comes in the request of the applicant tonight. Signs have, I think we're fair with signs in Centerville with how much sign you can have, but it's very particular. Your primary wall signs, your secondary wall signs are reduced, so your primary wall gives you X amount. Your secondary wall gives you 5% of that amount. And then your other two walls on the building are just 32 square feet. So you have a generous portion to use for your wall sign on a business, and then the other signs it progressively reduces in the allotment of sign area that you can utilize. We also have our low profile signs, which are monuments or you see based out. We also have our pole signs and different regulations associated with them. But the question becomes is mural. Typically signs come in a boxed format, meaning that it has a cabinet hooked to electrical, has a sign face, pan channel style, cabinet style. There's usually something of that nature occurring to install the sign, and that's what we come in and get a building permit and a zoning approval permit for the installation of that sign. Painted signs becomes, what are they? What is a painted sign? I won't talk about the painted sign on the corner over here because I think that's something we have to work out on a local business on the corner of Parish and Main. That's not the exact location. It's the south, or it's the southeast corner or southwest corner. So we have a painted sign, and that sign has not received a building permit or a sign permit for installation because it doesn't require connection to electrical or anything that constitutes a building permit, but it would require a sign permit of some type. But this petition came in as that sign went up, so I decided I would wait to figure out how to handle that particular sign with the petition on the murals and see how it plays out and determine what the code would be on this other situation. But essentially, the request is to be an opportunity to paint a mural scene, and my understanding from the applicant, there would be some saying associated with it. And so this becomes this complex area.
Some saying?
Some saying
Okay.
is included as part of it. So this becomes an interesting debate in a legal framework, which I'm making Lisa sweat right now as we speak about.
I don't think so. She looks rock steady.
Well, good. Maybe she can help me out. When you're dealing with messages and signs and so forth, there is a First Amendment right attached with it. So an example of business signing. We have time, place, and manner. This place, this size, that's what you can do. We don't regulate what goes on the sign. It can be a commercial message. It can be a non-commercial message. The message is allowed because that is part of that speech right associated with conducting business or expressing whatever your opinion might be, if you so choose to do so, like campaign elections, so forth. The mural is one where right now under the ordinance, the mural will qualify as a sign because it is some type of image, logo, color, something intended to draw and attract to a business. So if somebody went out there, I would have to enforce it under the sign ordinance, and that would be the limited time, place, and manner by ordinance associated with it. Typically, when you're dealing with a mural and somebody's wanting to do some expression in an art form, they're often larger than the narrow square footages you associate with businesses. And so that's why murals become something to be discussed about. A lot of jurisdictions do regulate murals and enter into the tenuous place of artistic expression, free speech, and zoning rights and regulations. I've looked at it, a choice if somebody chooses to do a mural, it is either going to fall under the sign ordinance or it's going to fall under the graffiti. There is no in-between measure to work within. So the question before the council is do you want to leave it in that bright light area? It's either graffiti or it's a sign, and here's our narrow places of signs. Or is there something you would have in an interim space where it's authorized, so it's no longer a graffiti element, but it is also an opportunity for somebody to express what they want in an image or a saying or something. And this is where things can get kind of uncomfortable, because when do you cross boundaries, and when does case law come in and say when you have right? From my perspective, I would hate to be labeled as graffiti. If we want to look at it strictly as a sign, we can put it into the narrow box of the sign ordinance and determine whether that should be broadened or changed. I hesitate to do that because signing is a sacred territory to businesses and everybody, so the more you open up discussions about the actual regulation of signs, the more controversy you could create. Centerville had its own controversy in the 90s about signing in the city. So it is a sacred place and can create a lot of anxiety in the community of how we're regulating signs. So opening them up would be, I presume, a concern. If we can come into an agreement that there is this interim place of a mural, I think that's something that has some community identity to it. I don't know if it's the temperament and desire of Centerville to do that, but I do think that murals have a community identity, because often murals are associated with something even as back as the old advertisements on the side of buildings in major cities, to painting cabinets, the ugly green cabinets, the big power cabinets on the intersections. They often engage a local artist to put an image on those cabinets. And so I was up this summer in Missoula, Montana, and all of their electrical cabinets are painted. And they all go out in a program for community art and paint that. And so right now that would be graffiti to do that. And so we debated internally. It is not, I don't want to persuade you that this is a perfect ordinance that's being proposed to you. It's not. There can be challenges to the ordinance, but I think that it's worthy of, if we want to move that direction, to look at some regulation, because I think most individuals who are looking for murals are okay with it as long as they have a chance to express that. And I'll let the applicant talk about how you would, what their intended desire is. The way we drafted we changed it from the initial petition that came into us. We've made it fairly narrow to begin with. This is the idea of where should this go and what should it go. The narrowness in staff's mind is that these are community, not a big corporate message to be sent. This is community artwork. This is a community identity. The actual location of the petitioner is on Main Street. That's a local community area. So the question is can murals function in the CM zone? And that's where its narrow limitation is. And also it would be a permit process, a permitted use permit process with some approval criteria by the zoning administrator. The zoning administrator can approve sign permits now, so we just transfer the mural permits identity to the zoning administrator also, as long as it met the criteria. So there is a draft proposal to you. I expected a little more debate at the Planning Commission, to be honest with you, because it can be a sensitive nature about expression of ideas and opinions. They were fairly supportive of it. And so they passed, I think, the version of staff that Cassie wrote up to you in your draft ordinance. So it does come to you with a recommendation, but I do think you have to decide how you want to land it by policy. And so I wanted to give you that policy base first. So that's our recommendation to you.
So I do have one question for Lisa. In this ordinance as it's currently drafted, what is our definition of obscene message or images? Because that's listed as a criteria for murals.
Right, so obscene message or
Images.
images is basically relying upon a U.S. Supreme Court case, which would basically just be something that is offensive to the community. So I think there's a body of case law that we use to go to that. So, you know, obviously drafting regulation of artwork is very difficult and problematic. And generally it needs to be content neutral, or it kicks you into the strict scrutiny standard. But I think this ordinance is trying to walk that line of providing some sort of regulation to allow this type of sign, rather than just merely prohibiting it, which our current code does. But under the First Amendment, the First Amendment does not cover pornography or obscenity or things like that. So those are excluded from the First Amendment protection in artwork. But we would have to debate that. It's one of those, yes, it's defined, but it's a very generalized definition that would have to be debated at the time.
Yeah, my perspective is that you do have a discussion in your sexual oriented business ordinance that talks about what obscenity is and what nudity is, and that's a place certainly to decide the parameters of what constitutes obscene. So you do have a definition in there.
Does this only apply to commercial?
This only applies to the CM zone as you're proposed. So it would not apply to the Parish Lane commercial area or the Pages Lane.
How does it apply, or would it apply to an R1 area where someone had a large blank wall?
No, that would still fall under the graffiti definition.
So I have a neighbor, and after staring for 28 years at a flat cinder block wall, this neighbor has painted the wall sometime this summer with a rather colorful, interesting design. I have yet to figure out if it means anything. Frankly, I think it's relatively attractive compared to the gray cinder block wall I used to look at.
Yeah, this becomes an enforcement decision on what, because your graffiti has a very clear, bright line of its definition. It's an unauthorized painting. The issue is if it's public, if it's viewable to the public, yes, I think you could run into somebody contesting that artwork now constitutes a graffiti. But now you're into private property, their private wall, their permission. I think it would be a very hard case to take somebody on the graffiti.
So you don't think we would challenge something like
I think it would be tough for us on somebody from an artistic expression of their own property done by them and their permission, because that would be what I would constitute authorization, is that they authorize it. Now, if somebody came into the private property and unauthorized it, a gang member, a tag artist, and that would constitute graffiti, and the person doing that to that property then could be liable for the charge of graffiti.
Is there any language besides just stating the word obscene, Lisa, that you feel could be added there?
I would just stick with that word. There's I can read you the definition, but I prefer not to in the case law. But
I'm just wondering if
it changes and ebbs and flows, and so the more you try to define, the less you're actually defining it.
Right. I'm just wondering, and I'm guessing you wouldn't feel comfortable with this, but even something like negative, probably
right,
too broad, right?
Exactly.
That's the problem with
that's
it.
The point. We're opening the door, to this beautiful positive message.
Right, and when you're looking at it, when it talks about offensive to the, obscene to the community or offensive to the community, Victorian times, an ankle, that's too much, and if you look at predominant groups of individuals, they may have lifestyle decisions or particular religious standards that they apply to that would be, that you could find plenty of things that could be offensive or considered obscene by any group. So that's what it's responsible. I've seen some great murals. I've seen some wonderful murals. I've also seen some that just, as a community, they would be shocked that they can't take it off the wall because it comes into free speech domain. So it's, for me, it's a tough one as to what are your triggering points to where if the community gets themselves up in arms over whatever it is that's on the wall, we don't even have to be specific. Does the local city government have a responsibility to take that public clamor and say that fits this definition and get rid of it? That's the struggle I have with that particular piece of it.
Yeah.
And the actual language it uses is if it would be offensive to the average person applying a contemporary community standard. And it also includes, the First Amendment does not provide protection for obscenity, fighting words, or incitement. But I think they need to be quite extreme,
Yeah.
because a lot of art is pushing at issues and certain messages, so that would be very...
Yeah, the risk from the planning standpoint is even in your sign ordinance, you're at risk of the box that's allowed for the same thing. So that's a struggle because we're at risk if somebody I could tell you a nice, fun 2002 Olympic story of 25th Street in Ogden. I won't bore you with it, but someday when you want to know that one, that would be a fun one to repeat. But you're at risk with, and this is the balance of we're trying to think about murals is in crafting something that tries to cover something that goes too far. It can go too far on your existing sign ordinance today. That's the struggle.
So do you think we're opening the door more than the original sign ordinance today?
Well, I'll answer it this way. You're opening the door, but I think if you have a permit system that has some criteria and the person is willing to go through that process, there is some trust that individual is trying to identify into the community associated with it. Because if you know the story of a dispute between two residential neighbors and a painting of a truck, there were some offensive things done on the side of a truck parked in front of someone's home. And although it was offensive, a person that has a bad bent will just use the artistic expression themselves to make the claim difficult for you to enforce if they want to. And so somebody who's coming in with a permitting process, trying to contribute, know there's some standards. It's like the sign ordinance. It's always open for risk, but you have more responsible entities doing it than the person who comes into the community and tags something. So the risk is there. I think it's relatively low. The experimental is in our community area, local businesses, the buildings, trying to avoid the big corporate argument of bigger buildings and so forth, trying to just paint the whole side of MTC with Reese's Pieces logo.
So we also have the applicant here, correct? Are you the applicant? And so would you like to present? It's now your opportunity to come to the microphone as well. Just tell us who you are, and I assume you're the business owner as well too, so.
Yes. Hi, my name is Becca Clayson. I run a design and video production agency on the corner of Center in Maine, so just right down the street here. And there's a big white wall there, I think you can see in the file that you guys have. And it would be perfect for a mural. And the reason I want a mural is because I am a creative person and I'm also a lettering artist. And I want to create something, or actually I want to hire Jill DeHaan, who's a local muralist and a friend of mine. I want her to create, to hire her to create something on the side of the wall there that people walking by can enjoy, something that will brighten their day and make them smile a little bit, and something that will also make the community a little bit happy. And if this new zoning text amendment passes, maybe no one else will create a mural, but even if they don't, I want to be able to have one on my building, just because I think it will, I don't know, bring some joy to a lot of people and be like a place where people would want to stop and take a photo in front of. And I think it would improve some of the walkability of the street there, a purpose to be around there. And we don't sell anything in our store. It's like we provide services and things. It's not like a retail shop. I don't think those are allowed in that area anyway. But so it's not like I'm trying to get people to come into my shop or my studio. I just really want to make the building a little more fun and beautiful to look at. And I understand that there are some concerns about for like what might open the door to other things that other people might do, but I agree with what was said earlier. If people are willing to go through that permit process, I think they have, good intentions about it and are willing to go along with like the regulations that are involved there, and probably doing it for the same reasons that I am, to like contribute and do something inspiring and uplifting.
Thanks. Questions for the applicant? Stay there in case they have questions.
I guess in reading the proposed ordinance, well, not the proposed ordinance, but the information on the ordinance, it says murals may not be painted on buildings that are on the National Register of Historic Places. I thought that building was, so is the exception that it's already been painted?
Right. So if it's already been painted, that's already like taken down some of the quality of that original brick or whatever that material is. And so at that point, if it's painted over another time, it won't, do more damage that already hasn't been done.
Okay.
Further questions for the applicant?
I'm not sure how to do this. Can I show other members of the council something that's on my phone?
Can you email the picture to Mackenzie and she can put it up on the screen?
Sure, I think I could do that.
Don't email it to other council members because that's a violation of the Open Meetings Act.
What's your email address, Mackenzie? Or
Probably just faster to hand her the phone and she can probably type it in for us.
That's fine.
While they're doing that, Scouts, thank you for being here. Are y'all one troop? Okay, that's wonderful. In the time that I've been mayor, about 9 months now, I've had Scouts from time to time in, but I don't know that I've had a whole troop. So it's great for you to be here. You can probably tell what we're discussing. Previously, we discussed the street contract, the sweeping. We had a work session before this meeting to where we went and looked at some playgrounds and some pickleball courts, because we're looking at upgrading our playgrounds. So those are the neat things that you can do within government. So we hope you get involved, and we're glad you're here. And we would love to also have you sometime come, if you're up to it, and present our colors and lead our Pledge of Allegiance as well too. If your leader will get me that information, we would love to have you do that. Is that something you guys would like to do? Okay. Thanks for being here. We appreciate you being here. So it's always fun to have you come. So are we ready for that, or
I also have a
can we
question
chat
for,
with the Scouts still?
I have a question for Corey that he could be answering. On the 50% that the mural is allowed, 50% per wall. So is that like in this situation per side of the building? Because it's kind of
Yes.
there are separate walls.
Yeah.
And why the 50%?
Because murals about this side as a thumbnail are not very fun. And murals with an artistic expression have usually some type of aesthetic quality to it. So staff's looking at it from a perspective of it being a mural, not a sign, not something that is small and interpreted as a sign. This is intended to be
Was it a minimum of 50% or a maximum?
I don't remember what Cassie said
So
on
we,
there.
we actually didn't put a 50% in the ordinance. That was the applicant's suggestion.
Oh, and it isn't in the
But
ordinance.
I
Because
think
that
if you-
didn't make sense to me, so that makes more sense.
Yeah,
if it is
I'm
in-
covering for Cassie. She's out of town, so she ran this
Yeah,
project.
the ordinance doesn't have a, it excludes murals from any sign calculation.
Oh, okay.
Gotcha.
Because I remember the 50% too from the petition.
Okay.
Yeah, I had put that in my original wording, just because I thought if it wasn't 100% of the wall and taking up the whole thing, it might be a little easier to swallow.
Which are, you can do time, place, and manner types of restrictions, but.
My email isn't working on this computer, so I can't pull it up. I apologize.
I'm not sure how else to get it to you.
I guess you could pass your phone around.
To the whole.
And describe to the audience what you're showing.
This is a mural that is on a wall about half a block from my office, which I understand is a contentious issue in Salt Lake. It's at 250 South State, faces to the south. The building in question, prior to being painted black on its side, was a cacophony of different paints and colors and extremely unattractive. About 2 years ago, I think it was last summer, that mural went up. I understand it is a contentious issue in Salt Lake because it is symbolic of gay rights. At the same point in time, I think the wall looks one heck of a lot better than it ever did before, and I don't particularly care what it's symbolic of. If anyone in the audience would like to see what's on my phone, I'm more than willing to share it with people. I had not particularly intended to do this prior to coming, but with this discussion, I remembered that it was on my phone. So I'm recognizing what Corey is saying about anything that you do like this opens a door, and yet, just like the neighbor up in my neighborhood, what he's done on the wall, I think looks a whole heck of a lot better than it used to. And I think this looks a whole heck of a lot better than it used to. So, my personal preference from the past is I would prefer not to vote on something immediately following a public hearing, but I would lean towards supporting the ordinance.
So any further questions for the applicant before I open this for a public hearing, since it is scheduled for a public hearing? Okay, so if not, then this is an issue, like we said, that is an issue that should be presented for a public hearing, and so that means that when I open this issue up to the public hearing, that any member of the public can comment on this particular issue. So I will now open the public hearing. If no comments from the audience, then I will close the public hearing. And you don't have to respond to any public comment, but I would now say to council, is there...
There's debate on whether he wants to talk. Are you sure? We'd love to hear from you.
I can reopen the public hearing. Does somebody want to say something?
You can come up here or up there.
Oh, wait.
Speak to the mic, Jeremy.
Yeah. So I am now reopening this public hearing on this matter related to murals. Okay, so the public hearing is reopened.
Okay, well.
Give us your name.
My name's Jeremy Arbuckle. I was just going to say that I think that it could be allowed if, again, if there's a good vetting process to, some hoops to jump through and some understanding of, to the public of what's acceptable. So kind of what's been discussed already. So that's how I feel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Any further comments? State your name.
My name is Hayden Wilmot, and I think that we should like keep the murals, because if they're positive murals, they could actually give back to their day. Like if they're having a bad day, they can just kind of like be happy and just really like. There was this one picture that I saw when I was like 7, I think, that really just made my day and made me really happy, because I was having a rough day. I missed a lot of the fun stuff just because there's something I didn't know happened. Like, I had one missing, like, it was just this one problem that I accidentally missed, and I didn't know it was missed because I wasn't given the paper, so I had to miss all the fun and everything while I was doing my assignment. And then my mom went on to Facebook, and there was this really positive thing that said, "Think happy today, because you'll be awesome tomorrow," or something like that. And it just really made my day, because it's just basically saying, you're smart, you can do this.
Thank you so much. Any further comments on the public hearing? If not, I will close the public hearing, and we will move on for further questions from the council members for the staff or the applicant. If not, then I will entertain a motion.
So I was just giving a location of a mural downtown.
Is this the right one?
Yeah, do you want to spin around? I think the other direction.
Here.
Here you go.
Okay.
So, yeah, if you angle back a little bit, because it's on the side of the building and the back of the building. So if you walk down the street a little bit more there, I love virtual walkthroughs. Yeah, so go ahead and zoom up on that. You might get a different angle to it. So this is a mural downtown. Salt Lake Business has this. And actually there's quite a few murals downtown Salt Lake. I've never heard anything negative about that piece of the mural. But if you go up to the edge, I don't know if you might have to reposition that piece right there. I think you just drove through the building.
Where are we? This one?
Yeah. So if you just drop it right there in the corner, you might be able to get into that one.
Oh, I don't know if I can get to that corner.
On that corner, I'll just hold up my laptop, but there's what I think is a very tasteful mural recognizing the veterans of 1911, World War I. I have heard that is an extremely offensive and adversarial mural because it has a gun painted on it. I don't have any problems with it personally. I think it's actually a nice memorial that they put on the side of their building at their expense. This is where, for me, I draw some really hard and fast rules about where I participate in terms of what is artistic expression and what is community standard, because that, to me, if that were on a wall in Centerville, wouldn't offend me at all. But I can guarantee I could find somebody who that would offend. And so that's why I was asking about obscenity and offense, because it's really hard for me to say that's offensive, but other people could say that that's offensive. And there are murals like that in Salt Lake that are artistic expression where, like Bill said, they don't necessarily, they look nice, but there's a political message behind them that the community finds, a community could find offensive. I don't know how to deal with that.
Well, that would not meet the definition of obscenity.
Right.
It's not just offensive, it has to have a sexual connotation or a number of other items within that. So no, that would just be a piece of art.
My concern, I guess, is looking at that. I'm not offended by it, by any means. But yet I don't know on our little small Main Street, if we got several of those, it certainly could change the feel of our Main Street. I mean, you're going to have the ones that are professionally done, but yet if you have me down there painting on the wall, you're going to be in trouble.
So,
Are you asking for a certain degree of proficiency to be demonstrated as part of the application process?
The other one to me was really big and would definitely, if I had a certain type of business next to it, could be kind of offensive. Do you know what I'm saying? If I had a real professional building next to that and they painted the whole side with what we were just looking at, I don't know that that's what I would want on our Main Street as far as we're trying to get it to be professional and, you know.
Well, the offset theory would be that somebody doesn't want to deliberately damage their building by making it, offensive, obscene, or tasteless, because that ultimately would damage their standing in the community and potentially their business. So the assumption would be under that philosophy is that responsible people are going to put up responsible murals that are in harmony with the community they're servicing.
But that one has been put up, and like I said, to me, that would be kind of weird next to certain things.
Mackenzie, the one I was trying to show people is on the west side of State Street at about 250 South. If you can go back to that same program George was using, you can probably.
I think if you just Google Salt Lake City murals,
which
you can pull up most of them, including the one Bill was referencing.
I think the important thing in this discussion, though, is going to be to get to the core principles behind it, right? And so, I mean, we can look at a lot of examples of murals. They're all over the place. But what are the core principles that we're making the decision based on? And it's a tough one, because they're battling principles here. It's a really tough one. I'm torn between the core principle of giving flexibility and freedom for people to do with their property what they might, for enlivening an area that is maybe kind of dead. But then I also am pulled towards the core principle of our existing Main Street overlay ordinance, which is to really have high standards and a pretty thorough process that's expected to say, we want to see this redeveloped and we want it to be a beautified and improved face of our city. And so this particular instance of a mural example that we've seen would possibly do that, but the idea of what murals could be is maybe a little too open as far as supporting that principle, which we have in place now. So my leaning right now is that towards the principle that we already have in place for the goals of improving our Main Street, I would lean towards not allowing this because it's a little bit too open-ended, a little bit too flexible. We've talked about possibly altering and changing those goals. We don't have a public space plan in place yet. We do want to improve walkability and livability, but we don't have that defined yet as to how we're going to do that. And so I would maybe want this to be part of that broader discussion rather than piecemealing it. Let's throw this in and try that. Let's throw this in and try that.
So we've had many comments. Are we ready to make a motion, anyone? Or are you pulling something up, Mackenzie, that we're going to look at for entertaining a motion?
I was just throwing up a couple more examples of murals around Salt Lake, and they can be very tastefully done and can add to the community, like the one that for the violin school downtown. It's a fantastic mural. There's a lot of good aspects to them. I think you can tread the water of Howard Hill, and we've got a pool table in our community sort of attitude where you've taken it to something that's innocuous and fine for a business, gets blown out of proportion outside of its original intent. I don't know, I am pretty much neutral on this at this point because I can see benefits either way. I can see benefits in harmonious existence and don't change anything, you know, we'll be static and we'll keep things the way they are. I can also see doing something a little fresh and maybe changing it's not, and sorry Main Street, I'm gonna say it, it's not as if there's a cohesive look right now and a single mural will not change that complexion one way or another.
Right.
Will it start a flood of murals? Probably not. It's not allowing it harmful of a business owner, potentially. So, like I said, I'm neutral.
And then I feel the same way. I'm quite neutral, so I'm trying to, for my own sake, dig and find those principles that would help me decide one way or the other. The other side of the coin, different than what I just stated, is the principle that this was unanimously voted in favor by the Planning Commission, who we should, to some extent, be relying on. So if we feel neutral about something and they've recommended it, then I would lean towards supporting that recommendation, just for the fact that that's what we've asked them to do, is to make these decisions. And if we don't have a pressing argument as to why to go against their recommendation, then I'm also pulled that way.
I would like, I'd like to make a motion.
Great.
I'd like to move that we table this. I'd like something on the website asking for public comment. I'd like to comment to our two scouts who spoke that your comments highlighted one of the things that Lisa mentioned, and that is that both of you mentioned positive things in the content of a mural, and enforcing positive things is almost unenforceable. Is that right, Lisa? As long as it's not obscene.
Requiring a positive, yeah, we can't really require
so
what they can, the content of it.
Your comments themselves, although meant to be positive, are dissuading me, although my original feeling is positive. But I'd like to invite more public comment. We've had two incidental comments who didn't know they were coming to talk about it, and the petitioner. I'd like a little bit of time to think about it, so I'd propose that we bring this back in 2 weeks, do what we did with the last item, and that is leave the comment period open through a week from tomorrow. That gives Mackenzie time to accumulate anything that's submitted and then vote on it next week.
Second. Can I ask one question of staff? Corey, if this were to pass in its current form, what would Muralgeddon look like? What are we talking? 3 buildings, 4 buildings, 5 buildings? Because I think the problem with public comment is making sure they have scope relative to how many murals could end up in this area so that we can have either extreme. What are we talking? How many buildings could potentially have murals under this ordinance?
That's a good question. We've got a number of buildings. I mean, we have like 80 properties along there in the notices, so the building is conducive to painting, I think, is an issue of count. I would probably, more than 5.
Probably
Okay.
a dozen.
But, less than 20.
And the reason I'm asking that, Bill, is I really do want people to take it in scope and context, and it's not everything, it's a small portion, and if it makes sense, it makes sense.
So how are we proposing that they find out about this because there's not that many people watching on YouTube to give us further input? Well, the last time we did it, we had input built in because we had people here with us. I mean, do we really foresee any further input?
I think we might, because it only takes 3 or 4 that are watching this. Either they're really for or against, and they get the word out. We're not going to get 100 comments, but we might get a few. I'm really torn because I think her mural would be awesome, and that's an old building, and that's where it belongs. But I do worry a lot about somebody that's a little disgruntled putting some really strange thing down there that everybody's got to live with, and it kind of not helping our Main Street get redeveloped because we've made it.
So to answer the mayor's question, Mackenzie, could we put a post up on that banner section of the website that invites comment this week? Because
Yes, we
that's
could
the
do that.
first thing that people kind of
And send it
jumps
to
out and
me,
grabs
please.
you when you look at it.
Yeah, yeah, and we can also put it on Twitter and Facebook.
That's why we need our electric sign out front.
I think
Good.
Twitter and Facebook get more publicity than an electric sign might, just as far as who sees it.
Come
To
on,
the mic.
to the microphone, please.
If it is on Twitter and Facebook, couldn't that go beyond Centerville? Like, if it were shared, like, this person's trying to get murals allowed in Centerville, let's help her out and do it, or like, no, let's not do that, then it could get
They
reacted.
have to give their their name and address when they
Okay.
submit.
They have to be Centerville residents or
Uh-huh.
business
No,
owners?
no, they don't.
Not to make a comment. they
We're a
don't.
public body, so anyone can comment if we're leaving it open for a public hearing. We, as Bill mentioned, there were some comments made a couple of years ago. This room was filled, and not a third of them were from Centerville. They were all from outside the city making comments.
Yeah. And I would caution the council before we go into putting our public notices on Facebook and Twitter. I think we need to have a policy about that. We've never done that before. This is an applicant-driven application. I do have some due process concerns with that. Certainly putting it on our website, we've done that before, but let's get a policy before we start using that medium.
My proposal would be just for the website, and if people here want to share it, then we can't stop them. So if you want to load the discussion, then contact all your friends and tell them to vote for it.
I mean, I have.
But ask people, but tell people that we can read and understand that when one person writes a paragraph and then 69 send the same thing in and it reads the same way, I can extrapolate that to being one comment. So we want the comments, we want original comments, not
Right.
regurgitated comments.
Right.
And you're certainly free to stack the deck.
I mean, of course, I want this to happen, or I wouldn't have applied for it. So I probably would try to get people to approve it. I mean, my sister
And
and
we
her
expect
husband
that.
live in Centerville, and I mean, I have, due to my like art and video that I create, I have 56,000 followers on Instagram. I could try to stack it that way, but they don't live in
joy.
Centerville, so it like wouldn't really be relevant to them. They would just be supporting me, I guess, but I don't have to do that.
Well, please don't send to your 56,000, but if you want to send to your sister and her husband and 3 neighbors, go for it.
Yeah, and this is, I just wanted to add this earlier and forgot to, but Cutler's has a mural on the side of their building currently. I assume it was grandfathered in. And I mean, that one doesn't have any lettering on it. It's like an image, which is fine, you know.
Is it a sandwich or what?
I think it's like, I can't remember what it, like,
Probably
it's like a Western
Yeah, I think it's
landscape and
I
people.
think it's a
something.
wagon, isn't it?
Wagon.
Pioneer wagon.
Yeah,
Something
I
like
haven't
that.
noticed it.
And yeah, like people haven't even noticed it, right? Or cared that it's there. So I guess I just want to put that out there.
Good point.
Okay. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Thanks. So we have a motion and we have a second to that motion. We've debated it further. Are we ready to vote on that motion? If so, will you restate the motion, Bill, since it's been a while?
That we table this for 1 week to the next meeting to be voted on at that point in time, that we put a comment on the webpage encouraging comments on the question that would be available through Wednesday, the 10th, and then Mackenzie can accumulate whatever is submitted so that we can vote on it that next meeting.
Okay, so we're tabling it 2 weeks till the next vote. We're accepting comments out through Wednesday, the 10th.
Right, second.
Okay. And we have a second on that. Okay, Councilwoman Ivy.
Aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Well, I hope Cutler's comments, so now that we're aware of it, that's an enforcement action if we don't vote it in.
Unless it's grandfathered.
didn't know that we have a provision for that. do
I
we?
don't know that it is.
Moving on to item number 4, this is discussing potential amendments to the South Main Street Corridor Overlay Zone affecting the fire station project. This is something that was brought up by a couple of our council people, so I will, we do not have a presenter from staff. I would allow one of those council people or any council person to lead this.
I'm the one that initiated it, coming out of the groundbreaking and prior comments from the chief. There are 2 issues caused by the form-based code that are creating difficulties, in his view, for the fire department. And those 2 difficulties are the setback provision on a portion of the building, which requires a plaza or decorative area, and coming up with something that would work within the code and regulations for that. The second issue is the plaza area to the south of the driveway, which is immediately adjacent to the driveway, and the chief is very concerned about that being a spot where the public, primarily kids, might aggregate and then be in conflict to the egress of fire equipment during time of an emergency. So those are the 2 issues. I have met with Corey to try and come up with some middle ground. We have a couple of thoughts that have been submitted or under consideration. Story was told during the dedication that the street number for the new fire station is 343, which happens to be the number of firefighters who were killed on 9/11, which is very symbolic to the chief and the fire and employees in the fire district. So we're trying to come up with something that would recognize that and embellish, in effect, the cement between the sidewalk and the building for the entrance to the fire station. The other is something with regard to this little plaza area, which at the moment is sitting right adjacent to his driveway and is a point of concern. And we haven't really made any progress on that. But that's the issue. There are different ways to resolve it. Corey might want to comment if I'm massacring the explanation you gave me. One would be by changing issues in the form-based code, which leaves him and Lisa a little bit nervous. The other would be by trying to modify the current design such that it would fit the form-based code but also fit the chief's preferences. George and I are kind of working with the chief and Corey to try and work that out. I think that much additional consideration at this point in time is probably not time beneficial.
Sure, Corey.
One comment, appreciate Councilmember Ince coming in and looking at the plans and looking at the options. That was a good discussion I had with him yesterday on that. I'm certainly discussed with him that code amendments, we could pursue the road of further code amendments. I explained to him some difficulties with that, some reservations with it. It's not that it can't be done. It's the issue of narrowing it down so that we can handle it without being too specific that it becomes a target of saying you're applying some unfair standards to someone. In my discussion also with Councilmember Ince, it was to discuss if the heartburn is what they proposed, and that's what I want to be clear on, what they proposed. In the ordinance it says a courtyard, green space, or other design element. That's an amendment you actually passed for them. That didn't come from the form-based code. That came from the amendment. So this other design element was specifically placed in there, knowing that some of the courtyard and the plaza issues was a concern of the fire department in the amendments. They proposed originally colored concrete with a checkerboard pattern. As they got to their final site plan, they didn't like that, so they came up with a score pattern. And now the score pattern is not, is being pushed back against. And so I sense from my perspective that we have much to do about the form-based code and whether it stays or whether it goes. And letting an issue drive that makes it just holistically difficult to do without appearance of we're just looking at one specific user.
Favoritism.
That's the problem. That's why I have concerns with that. If we can reach with the fire chief other design elements and reach a satisfactory place, my understanding is that the Hogan construction wouldn't be pouring that till spring. So we have some time to either decide it needs an amendment because we can't agree to it, or we can come up with something that they agree to and substitute that as another design element and get that approved. And I would prefer to try to go the lesser direction of if we can come to an agreement with a design element that works. Hogan specializes in concrete etching and design. The idea we talked about is whether the 343 and some design element associated with it could be replaced in a manner that they can handle the issue of maintenance and so forth. You know, Hogan in construction is an expert in this. And so it'd be nice to engage before we just say, this can't be done because of maintenance or costs, which I don't want to, we talked about what it means. Can we get with Hogan, the chief, whoever it takes, and say, can we use this other design element statement, come up with it, and substitute it with the elements that they have problems with? So that's would be my hope.
Yeah, and I'm kind of, George and I are going to be the go-betweens to try and bring that back to everybody.
Sounds great.
I think we're closer than we are further apart on this.
I think we are,
from the chief's
too.
perspective. So I think we can definitely get this nailed long before they have to throw up forms and start pouring concrete.
That'll be nice.
All right, thanks for the report. Anything else on it? Thank you. We'll move to item number 5. This is reports from training at ULCT annual conference. Councilman Entz and I attended in April down in St. George, and he sent some reports out, and we both attended some very good sessions by email. I thought that since we had a shorter agenda tonight, that we could do some reports in council meeting as well too. So I don't know, there's to my knowledge, there's 3 of us that attended sessions. I know that Councilwoman Fillmore is prepared to talk about some. Councilman Entz, did you have?
I attended a small amount this year. I'm going to pass.
Okay. And then I had a little bit to report on too. So Councilwoman Fillmore, are you ready to
go first?
Sure.
So I don't, and then whatever you've covered, I'll just pull out of mine.
Why don't you go first?
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds fine.
Yeah.
All right. So I was just trying to pull up. Why don't you first go to the Y2
Housing?
Yeah. So the main theme of this conference was something we've all heard about and talked about some here, and that is growth and housing affordability. And Utah is kind of breaking records actually right now in the amount of research that we're doing along these lines. So I just really quickly wanted to go, Y2 Analytics has done this research, and they're wrapping it up, and they're going to write up a more in-depth report, which we'll all be able to look at, and we can summarize it in another meeting. But as this says, it's a historical review, and was the first step. Go ahead and just go down. In-depth focus groups, go ahead. Representative scientific survey, and this was interesting to me that they really went above and beyond any, way above and beyond numbers needed for statistical significance. Just really cement that this is legitimate data. For statistical significance, you really would need 500 or less, and they surveyed in depth over 2,000. Okay, this is what I wanted us to see here, because I thought this was fascinating. So in that in-depth survey that is absolutely statistically significant, housing affordability was the #1 most important issue by a lot. And then second, air quality, education, infrastructure, such as roads, bridges, and transit, healthcare, jobs in the economy, other crimes and public safety are way down, which probably means because we're doing so well, right? Water quality, supply, and conservation. Okay, so I just wanted everybody to see that. I thought that was pretty amazing. And then I'm going to just quickly go through some of the things that were repeated over and over again messages, and some specific notes of things that people said that struck me. First of all, Governor Herbert came and spoke to us, and he just pointed out the growth issue that in 1947, when the year he was born, was the year that Utah hit their 1 million population mark. We just passed 3.2 million, and in 40 years should be 6 million. He said, growth is the one thing that keeps me awake at night. How can we accommodate the growth pressures we are facing because of the success of our state? And he challenged us as municipal leaders. He said municipal leaders are the front line on this issue, and we're the ones who will help him sleep better at night, depending on how well we tackle this. So these are the things that he is challenging us to do. #1, land use. We need to address zoning capacity to allow people to have somewhere to live. #2, infrastructure. He pointed out that 64 million on roads was what was spent the year before he came into office, and we now spend 600 to 700 million, and it's still not keeping up with the roads that need to be built to try to keep up with the growth in our state. And so then he challenged us, if we went from spending 64 million a few years ago to 600 and 700 million now, and it's not enough, there's no way we're going to be able to build roads out of this challenge. And so how do we leverage the infrastructure that we already have? He challenged us to consider walkable communities, having people sited closer to transportation, and accommodate the market need for this. Right now, the market demand is being stifled with government intervention. And is that really us being leaders in what we should be doing? And then the third issue he addressed is taxation, and he challenged that maybe the 50-50 model won't work anymore, but that's for another day. So this tie between land use and infrastructure was just an absolutely repeated theme throughout the conference. The housing affordability crisis isn't just about housing, but about how we use our land and how it's connected to our transportation infrastructure. And so a point that was made in 5 different classes or presentations I attended was that housing costs isn't just the cost of the housing, but the housing plus the transportation costs. So we need to always remember that in our zoning decisions. And then this question was kind of threaded throughout everything that I heard. How land efficient is our revenue, and how land efficient are we being? Housing affordability increases as we use our land more efficiently. This means, and then this was another repeated thing. I know it's something you've heard from me, but this is just something I heard at the conference. So parking. In one session I sat through, it says parking is the key to this question, how land efficient is our revenue? It's the most important, boring topic on earth. So we'll just need to continue to address this issue of parking and really learn to understand and dig in how much parking is really needed. Poor land intensity means costs rise, quality of life is affected, and air quality is affected negatively. Right now, most codes require 4 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of building, which means 1,600 square feet of parking is needed for 1,000 square foot of actual building. And is that really being efficient with our space that we have that's getting more and more limited?
Where is that required?
In most city ordinances. That's the average. And so this is dealing with our parking, correctly understanding parking demand and absorbing the parking demand in more efficient ways than parking lots that often sit empty is a low-hanging fruit that all cities should be addressing. Okay, we had an interesting main session on retail, and I thought we'd all be interested in that, so I took a lot of notes. And then after that, there was a retail panel. And so a question and answer. So that was really fascinating because there was such a broad variety of views there. There was the developer view, there was the academics view that studies the issue, there was city attorney, city planner. And so just a couple of lines from that. From the developer point of view, he pointed out that there's constant change, and we need to be really comfortable with that. That back in the day, they were always looking for 20,000, 30,000 square foot retail pads. Then it went up to 40 and 50, and now, for a while we were going up to like 200,000 size stores. But that pendulum swing went way over here, and it's reversing back. And so now they're looking back for 20,000 size sites again. And right now it was interesting that the big boxes are actually doing the worst, and the smaller, more nimble neighborhood retail, or the 20 to 30,000 size, is what's going to survive.
And that's what jumped out at me. You talked about they have 10,000 square feet. You need 1 acre of land, right, for each 10,000 square feet?
Because of the parking?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so now I'm talking about the size of office or service or retail space, commercial space that developers are now interested in, and it's more the smaller, more nimble. So our point being for us, maybe our Main Street has a chance, right? Because that is actually what the market is pushing towards, according to this developer and a lot of other voices that I hear. So again, this was emphasized again in this retail panel. Parking, reduce requirements dramatically, and everybody on that panel said from a policy perspective, the idea of parking minimums is antiquated. Remove the minimums and replace with maximums. Let the market decide. Minimums are maintaining old models that are going to be blown to bits. That was an exact quote. Those are my words, of course. Also, they pointed out about parking that it isn't that people want parking, it's that they want parking close to the store. And so even if you have plenty of parking, if that lot is spread out and sprawled out, then they're really mad if they have to. And so we have these things in the future coming, the automated vehicles that might actually people will just start using more and more and drop you off to exactly where you need to go. You don't even have to park. And of course, transit-oriented developments where you get dropped off to where you're trying to go, things like that. So that was the point. Parking is going to be changing a lot. Another thing from the developer, there ought to be housing in every zone, in every area, in every community. I never have a project that doesn't have a residential component. I thought that was interesting. Housing always needs to be tied to transportation. Housing plus transportation costs together is what hurts people. The barriers to redevelopment are fractured ownership, which we have seen a lot and saw especially over at the Pages Lane. Always require a going dark clause, always. That was a repeated message in this panel discussion. And RDAs can be extremely effective. But I think that this message is probably one of the most salient ones for our council. This, to be successful in redevelopment, is a long game. Political leaders need to understand that to be successful, that it's essential to get a plan in place and then stick with the plan. Fits and starts will ruin your success. Separate strategic plans for economic development backed up by market studies. It was the data that helped create the plan that then supported the sticking by the plan regardless of political variation. And the political will was then driven by the data, which allowed for the long-term sticking in with a project, because it takes years and years and years for big positive redevelopment changes to happen. All right. There was a lunch speaker. His name is Spencer Gardner. He was an academic born in Centerville, actually, now lives in Idaho. And his point was that we need to get very real about the causes of housing unaffordability, and that he pointed out to us that we use our zoning power for exclusion and segregation purposes, which he challenged is not supported by the constitutional reasons we are given that zoning power. So he was very challenging to all the people in the room and made people, I think, many people feel very uncomfortable. But I thought he had very valid points and also gave us examples of really concrete and doable solutions. And then, Mackenzie, if you could go to, is Spencer Gardner's name up there?
They don't have their names.
What's that second one?
It's the first one, isn't it? The one titled.
The 5 laws.
That one. Can you go to that? And then
Yeah.
just scroll down almost to the very end. You could like go to the end and then just back up to pictures of houses that you see. He had many valid points. I would encourage you all to read through actually all these materials that is posted on ULCT. But he, keep going up to the beginning of those pictures of it. He surprised everyone at the conference how much he focused on ADUs. So timely message for us. He said this numerous times, this is the lowest hanging fruit for land use efficiency. Everything always already exists. The structures exist, the infrastructure exists, the neighborhood exists, everything already exists. So he talked about ADUs, and maybe go up a little more. He listed the barriers. Yep, that just right there is good.
Okay.
Just the last one, yeah. They're either illegal or limited. There are expensive impact fees applied. They're conditional use or another public process. They require maybe costly separate water sewer hookups, and the owner-occupied requirement can reduce flexibility. And then he suggested some solutions to redefine single-family homes as ADU or 2 to 3 units, but disguised. And then he showed these visuals, and he said these are examples of single-family homes that actually are not single-family homes because more than one family lives in them. And you can just keep scrolling down to show those visuals. If it can fit into the neighborhood, why is it not allowed? Permitting smaller lots and by right development. And then he just made the very bold but true statement, if this is not allowed, you are creating a housing shortage. And that was really the whole point of the conference. Speaker after speaker after speaker, the top leaders in the state telling us as municipal leaders that we absolutely have to start tackling this problem. Abby Osborne, who's the director of the Salt Lake Chamber, said that it is those of us in the business community and hopefully as municipal leaders who are ahead of the curve in understanding this, and it's our job to do a strong awareness campaign to our residents and help them understand how pressing this issue is. And she challenged us to do these things: a general plan update, seriously tackle the moderate income housing issue, look at corridors, transportation corridors that can handle density housing, zoning and fees overview, what is our individual city's role? And she wanted us all as cities to sign the support resolution that I believe the chamber is working on. So she said, the business community and local officials are ahead. We need to bring them up to, we need to bring the community, the public up to speed and figure it out together. If we don't, we'll soon be Seattle with a 2-hour commute and unaffordability, or even the Bay Area with a 4-hour commute. We cannot build ourselves out of these problems. What are the things that we need to do besides trying to build ourselves out? Congestion pricing, road user charges, national e-commerce sales tax, bike and pedestrian networks, and expansion of public transit. And she said, those who are hesitant to invest in changes to what they are used to, different than what they're used to, keeps us stuck in the old ways. So those were the notes that I thought were really significant and really to the point of issues that we're discussing as a city here. They did not post. I went to one class on debt and when that is best and most healthy for the economics of a city, which was fascinating. They didn't post it, but I have the contact information and they were going to email it to me. So when I get that, I'll forward that to y'all. And again, I'll just recommend that you actually click on all of those. Just go to ulct.org and read through, because it's such great material, and if you can't be there, then spend a half hour to an hour reviewing it.
Thank you, Councilwoman Fillmore. What I was impressed about is at these conferences, when you have the breakout sessions, that there's something in those breakout sessions that relate to your city every time. I mean, Councilman Ince and I, when we were in St. George, we kind of had to choose, and we'd break out. Councilwoman Fillmore and I did some of that too. I had to miss the first day because I was subpoenaed to court within my business, and I had to answer that. Else I would have been stay out of jail, municipal ethics session, you know. That was one way to miss that. But I did get there that last day for one session, and it related to something that we were doing here with Centerville Cares. It was health and well-being in our communities. And there was 3 or 4 other cities that had started something, but there weren't a lot that were doing it, so that was really meaningful to me. There was a lot, both from, as Councilwoman Fillmore said, from our governor to our local leaders. We should point out that the Chamber of Commerce is trying to get around to all the cities to talk about this, and we have them scheduled to come in 2 weeks. You know, here to our city. And so I think the Chamber does a very good job staying on top of things. You know, one thing that stuck out to me, I don't know if it was said at the conference or another time, I thought I heard it there, but, you know, remember 30 years ago, we couldn't keep our children living here with us because there weren't enough jobs. And then now they're saying 30 years later, we're not going to be able to keep our children and our grandchildren living with us because housing is too expensive. I know I face that with my young adults. I mean, they're looking at places in Texas and other places that it's just a lot more affordable. And that's a big issue that we have for sure. What else? I would just kind of finish up with, I always like legal issues, as coming from a father who is an attorney and being in business for myself. But one thing that I thought was said good in the conference was that we need to keep in mind as mayors and council people what we're really doing for our citizens. And this really struck me. And really the main thing that we're doing is we're providing services to them for things that they can't do themselves, such as clean water, picking up their garbage, that sort of thing. I mean, you do that well, and you really don't have a lot of people complaining, you know. I mean, and that providing public services needs to be one of the first things that we're making sure that we focus on. And then a couple other things is, and I think the one thing I had highlighted, Lisa addressed it tonight, that if if we're sending emails during a public meeting, you can't do that. That's why she said take it over to Mackenzie. And one thing that stuck with me too, that if something is on the internet, you can't really enforce or bring action against somebody if it's on the internet. You know, if a resident's doing something within your city that's on the internet, you can't really enforce that. So that was just some of the highlights that I saw. There was a lot on land use and affordable housing, as we saw tonight, what things are going for just within our own city, what things cost, and that it's an issue you need to address. What I did like, and what the League of Cities and Towns did is that Y2 information that Councilwoman Fillmore referred to, as they said that their survey said that 40% of the survey respondents feel that it should be up to local municipalities. And so, I mean, that fits along, I think, on what our thought process is as well, too. So thank you, Tammy, for that report. And I think that if y'all want to reference the Utah League of Cities and Towns, you can go to some of these seminars, the ones that may fit to what you're all individually passionate about as well, too. So let's move to Mayor's Report number 6. You just heard from me a bit, but I'll go over what's happened in the last 2 weeks. I formed a tree board. We have people ready to go. We have Councilman Entz, who is ready to staff that, but one thing I haven't done is I probably have to do something legal on that, right, to form another committee. So Lisa, I guess you can help me on that, right?
Okay, so did you decide to create a formal committee or just
that's what I want to go to, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, we need to create that then.
Okay. So I got the people all called, they're all ready to go. Recommendations that all of you gave me, they all accepted. And so we're ready to go with that. The second thing is trying to see what's important. Just as a highlight, I went to the sideline, I should say. I went to the Council of Government meeting this past week, and Bountiful, Mayor Lewis, they had somebody there talking about ADUs, similar like we had done in a work session, and Mayor Lewis said that they had just passed the ADU ordinance in their city just last week. And they only had a couple people that really came out and said anything, so it was not a big deal. I should tell you that last Thursday I met with our city manager and Hogan on the sign coming in off of the frontage road, and the ball is now in Hogan's court, and they're supposed to get, we went through the city engineer and Kevin Campbell, and there's no problem getting that sign put in there. Hogan's is willing to do that. They're telling us what they can do and when, and we'll be getting something to us. It was supposed to be this week, so I could present that to you at the next council meeting. The frontage road is coming along, as you've all seen. I've been talking regularly with Kevin on that, and him and his assistants spent a lot of time down there. They've had to regrind it a couple times and put down and redo it, but I wouldn't drive it every day because it's a traffic hazard, but I do because I'm mayor, and so I got to see how it's coming along. So I drive the road 2 or 3 times a day, and but it's looking good, and hopefully we have that completed soon. Y'all heard about I was impressed by the search and rescue and their efforts that happened over the weekend. I just happened to be going up Parish Lane, it's just because I'd gone to Planning Commission and they'd talked with the Trails Committee, and I was looking at how Parish Lane came into our property, and at the same time I pulled up there, search and rescue had been called out and an ambulance had just arrived, and it was really amazing to me to see the effort. I spent an hour or two, and then I went back on Sunday morning and to the command post, and we got people from Davis County Search and Rescue, Weber Search and Rescue, Salt Lake Search and Rescue, Cache Search and Rescue, and a couple other people from Provo. And of course, most of these search and rescue teams, as you know, are all volunteer. That is led by the respective sheriff's office within that county. But it was amazing. I learned so much from it. He was found safe. He was found by somebody that had been camping overnight, and they had informed this gentleman that was camping overnight that they were looking for this man, and he saw him, and they brought him down, and so it was quite an amazing experience seeing that. I attended a week ago a mayor luncheon that the Chamber of Commerce put on. We also had Congressman Bishop there, and he reported mainly on Hill Air Force Base and how important an economic driver that is within our community. And then each of the mayors was allowed to take around 4 minutes to talk about what was going on within their city, and so I reported on some of the things that had taken place within our city. So that was a positive experience. Did I get everything? I think I did. So that is my report. Any questions for me? Well, thank you. Then we'll go to item number 7. And this is the last item, well, unless we have a closed meeting. This is to discuss the process for recruiting a new city manager. And I think this should be an open discussion. I think was what Steve Thacker said. He announced out a letter that this was what initiated this. And so I can't recall who brought it up. Was it you, Councilman Entz? Okay. So, do you want to lead off, or you want me to lead off on what I've done over the last 3 or 4 months?
Go ahead.
Okay.
I haven't done anything other than saying we ought to talk about it and a plan and approach.
Of course, I was aware of this at the same time you were 3 or 4 months ago, and so what I have done, and maybe I've expressed this in the past, and if so, I apologize if I'm repeating, but I have talked with half a dozen mayors that have throughout the state that have replaced city managers in the past couple of years, and in practically every case, if not every case, they hired. They started the process about 4 months out. They all used subcommittees to find the candidates and vet the candidates to get down to where I know that our code talks about that the council and the mayor make the decision on a new city manager, and so they've used that process to get down to 3 or 4 candidates that then the council and the mayor would interview. In most cases, they have found that their talent pool has come out of the City Managers Association. Many of them, that's how they've found the candidates, and so that's a little bit of the process that, as I've called these mayors, that they've gone through in replacing their city managers.
Has anybody used search firms?
Only one, and they said that that was fine, that their experience was okay, but the other 4 I talked to, they they did not use search firms. They all have expressed that they had very highly qualified candidates. The most current one that's an ongoing process right now is Farmington, whose city manager is retiring. And I was just talking with Mayor Talbot a week ago tomorrow, and he was saying that they had plenty of candidates as well too. That they also and all of this is expressed too, that very qualified candidates are coming at a fairly high price. So, so they're going through, Farmington's the most recent that's going through it. I've talked with South Weber, I talked with West Bountiful, who replaced the manager a couple of years ago. I talked with St. George, who replaced their long-term city manager of 33 years at the first of the year. And so that's what I've been finding.
Did any of them use, maybe not a search firm, but a professional, so you suggested a subcommittee, maybe a subcommittee consisting of 2 of the 6 of us, not defining who that would be, but coupled with a retained professional that we would pay a fee to help coordinate the search. I don't know that I would feel comfortable. I'd feel comfortable working on the committee. I don't know that I would feel comfortable preparing the advertisements and specifications and detailing where those would be placed, if that makes sense, to get the best coverage.
I think professionals are absolutely essential to that subcommittee. We just went through this process with the Rec District Board, and we had out of a 7-member board, 3 of us. Anyway, I might be doing those numbers wrong, but of course it wasn't a quorum. And then we had the attorney, 2 city managers, HR staff from one of the cities, and the staff that was there is what made all the difference, right? And you need both perspectives. You need the perspective of, well, we've sat through all these board meetings, and so we can tell you how to write the job description because we know what we're looking for, but there's no reason that we should be the ones doing those steps. That was what staff did. And the insights, too, into what kind of qualities we'd be looking for and qualifications that came from those full-time professionals was invaluable.
So in that process, I'm going to guess that you had someone from Bountiful because of their size in their HR department. Mm-hmm. Our HR department is some combination of...
I agree. In our city, we would want to probably hire an outside professional to come in. That would be my leaning at this time.
Yeah, it's all the city setup, and yes, they did use outside professionals. The subcommittees, they would staff with people like, as long as they weren't going for your, applying for the job, you know, a city manager from another city. I've had some...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's an interesting one I wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah, this was one of their subcommittee members. And
So I've looked at this in a number of directions, and as far as the recruitment goes, I am not opposed to using a professional to assist. I am very anti-headhunter because they're looking to score the recruitment fee. So I don't know from what type of headhunter works with city managers, but in the tech field, when you use headhunting firms to find people, I tend to find in a lot of cases they're very qualified on paper and they waste a lot of my time in interviews. So, because they're just trying to get them through the door even if they don't match up. So I would be interested in having a first round filter that uses senior staff in the city, police chief, city attorney, public works director, just to sample them with questions that are specific to their career fields to understand, recognizing the city manager is an administrative official, but they also need to be a generalist and understand what these departments do. I would be comfortable in having that first pass filter, the rough course filter, be that passes through a committee involving, I could see another city manager in there, but some of our department heads to determine whether or not they should go on to a second round. Because I would say we would be capable of determining their soft skills and depending on our individual fields, some of those individual items, but I'd like to see how they fare against a panel that they'll be working with.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We've talked about that before. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Interesting enough, in the research I've done, Steve is an anomaly. Most city managers, this is survey data that comes from 2012 through 2014. It's an academic paper I was reading. Their average tenure is 3.5 to 7 years in a city. So these folks who do the 20, 30 years, they are actually statistically the anomaly. And so when we're looking for a city manager, we need to be looking for the best qualified professional, but I'm not sure that necessarily we should be attempting to land somebody for the next 20 years because the data just doesn't support that's how long they're going to stay. If you get them to stay 7 years, you're doing really well. Now the offsets on that, as they say, there are intrinsic values to your community, culture, everything else that help bolster how long someone stays in a community. But I would say it's unrealistic to say we'll replace Steve with another Steve.
I'm sure some of that, Councilman McCune, is determined by the size of the city you have and that type of thing as well too. I mean, some cities are, Steve was that way till he came here. I mean, he was at smaller cities, just building his career, so.
Well, and that's what the paper talked about too, is he says that a lot of city managers are ambitious career professionals and smaller cities are a stepping stone to get to larger cities. But for every West Valley, there's probably 50 Centervilles. So yeah, they may reach a point where the offsets of living in a good community, having a small staff, and not being stressed out overweigh the money aspects for some folks. I mean, there are definitely city managers who love the big city and the corporate level salaries that go along with that, but we're never going to be able to pay that.
Yeah.
A lot of our local towns really close around here, though, have all had city managers that have actually been there a really long time. Yeah,
we're really a statistical anomaly because what they were saying was that you had the 3.5 to 7 year average tenure, and 80% of the city managers did not live in the communities in which they managed, which was kind of an interesting. So when you see Steve here for his career living in the community, that really is an outlier when you look at these other numbers. So just interesting additional data.
So is it, there are certain requirements, and I don't know the details of the requirements on police officers and where they live, and I think generally they are not that you have to live within the city that you're serving in, but you have to live within X miles of the city that you're living in.
That's correct.
So is that a provision that we would like to try to install in our process at some point? And is that something, Lisa, that we would be prohibited from doing?
Your ordinance already requires, I believe, the city manager live within a reasonable driving distance. But obviously, there's a lot of considerations in this process, and I think the council can have input in that process, but it might be helpful to have, to direct a few key persons to come up with some ideas and work with staff or whoever you want involved in that process, and input on who should be on the subcommittee. My input is the more professionals, the better. Those are the people that understand what city managers do, as well as if council members are interested in being on that.
I'm not trying to be antagonistic.
You're going to have to speak up, Bill.
I'm not trying to be antagonistic. Are you disagreeing with George's comments about senior staff having heavy participation? When you say professionals?
I think
or-
from what I've heard, more in the mayor and I have been involved in doing a little bit of background research on what a lot of the other cities have done in the last few years in hiring a city manager in Utah, and they're not using a subcommittee made up of department heads.
Yeah.
No, I don't think we should use department heads.
Why not?
Well, to the point I think that was already made, you might have department heads applying for the position. You might have those years of bias that maybe taint exactly what they're looking for, rather than a more generalist view as to what makes a successful city manager.
I can see that viewpoint. I can also see it from the flip side, is you get a perfectly papered individual who's a part of the appropriate professional associations. They come in and your police chief asks them a basic law enforcement question relative to staffing or something of that nature, to the specific needs of the community that that person has charge over. And that individual gives you an answer that's out of left field, shows that they have no competence in that area. As a police chief, I've not talked to the chief, I'm just using him as an example, could be Public Works. If they tell me I do not believe this person is qualified to act in this role, why wouldn't I want to accept their opinion as a professional in their area? I would, honestly.
It's a legitimate point. It would be a weighing of
it's a-
consequences that would come along with that
I-
narrowed perspective.
I'd be more inclined to have a department head from another city that may be on your subcommittee.
And, yeah,
Answer that question. Because-
that, to that point, and because the idea too of kind of having a say in hiring your own boss, I
Yeah.
think can be problematic in the future when that person is your boss.
I don't know. I've experienced it both ways. I've actually been on hiring panels to hire my bosses, and sometimes that's worked out great. Sometimes I've just had to lump it when later on I realize I don't like that person as much as I did in the interview. It's made me a little bit more wary about how I interview, but I don't necessarily want the process to be driven only by counsel or by outside experts. Because ultimately, let's go 10 years down the road, many of us may not still be in these positions that we're holding, but staff members, I hope, are still here. And in that, I would like them to have a voice in that, so that they feel that the professional competency is there, because they might spot something we won't. And that's the argument for why you have another city manager on your initial panel. That's great. But I'd like to see that staff was in some way included in this decision, because destiny control of what you do, I mean, we talked about hygiene factors many times before. What keeps people here isn't necessarily going to be salary, it's working conditions and who you work with. So I think that's worthy of a voice.
And if I could clarify, my point was not that department heads shouldn't be involved in the process. I do think that's a step somehow to have that involvement. My concern was just having the subcommittee solely made up of department heads.
Okay.
I think would be problematic
That's what I
and
was
not
trying
in
to
your
ask.
best interest.
And I would
That's what
agree with
asking.
you
You
on
weren't
that point.
excluding it, you were just saying don't make it only.
But I would be completely satisfied if the pool were 50 candidates and that subcommittee narrowed it down to, say, top 6, top 7. Because they're going to at least weed that down to the individuals that are palatable to other career professionals in the same field, department heads, and then we get down to the soft skills and the other things that we're looking for that are probably completely different than what the departments and the other professionals are looking for. I'd be very comfortable with a 2-step process like that. Because I personally do not feel qualified to do that first round, even on a subcommittee. I think that we could have input, but I'm not sure that I would feel qualified in reducing that pool down.
No, but I think a couple of us, or at least one or two of us, ought to be on the subcommittee from the beginning to participate.
Sure.
Just out of curiosity, Lisa, do you know, did Steve ever serve on a subcommittee to help another city retain a city manager?
I don't know, but I do think that I think in my discussions with the mayors that some other city managers have sat on those committees, probably voluntarily. And we have some very capable city managers in South Davis County that I'm sure would be willing to help us out.
Yeah, we do. As long as they're not interested in applying. I know
Yeah,
a couple,
maybe
I know a couple might be.
Currently retiring one in a neighboring city who obviously wouldn't be applying for the job, but has years and years of experience about how to run a successful
Is
city.
there one that meets that definition?
Dave at
Farmington.
Farmington.
Oh, that's right, you said
He'll
that,
have more
okay.
time on his hands than,
Yeah.
he's a friendly guy.
In terms of staff direction, I think the thing that we should come to tonight is at minimum, we need to, it's my project management background coming out, but we need to back this up from the notice date that Steve has given us for his last day and figure out what are the dates we have to have a professional retained and when these committees are going to meet. We at least need that timeline backing up, plus the format.
And the
We
process,
do-
what you want that process to
We
look
do,
like.
and especially we need that because we have holidays in the middle of that
That's what I was
timeline.
going
Right,
to say.
right.
It needs to be a little longer because of the
We're,
holidays.
we're basically, you can just call it dark for the last 2 weeks of December. That would,
You're
you just
dark
take
from-
that out of the
You're
schedule.
almost dark from from Thanksgiving through Christmas.
Depends on how much you eat, but yes, you're right. That month gets really hard to put together committees, so that's a month we've already lost.
Well, can I make a suggestion, and Mayor, that, I don't know if this is the right way to do it, but that we send a letter to the other city managers in South Davis County, asking if anyone is willing to donate, what are we talking, 25 hours worth of time over the next 2 or 3 months to participate in a committee? And is there a better way to find someone?
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Obviously, we need to determine how big the subcommittee is going to be and who else we would want on the committee as well, too.
Sure.
Yeah, I still think it would be helpful to have someone do some real background research on what these other entities have done, bring it back to the council and say, look, this appears to be, you know, a good recommendation, and then staff can make some other changes to it or that might be reasonable on the time frame for Centerville, but,
I only
you
have
know,
one
and
problem with
building
that.
on, you know, what the rec center just did, I think we have some really good examples of how to do this correctly.
Yeah, I only have one problem with that. There's nobody else other than you here to take the assignment.
Well, you can assign things to people that aren't present. We do that.
Or assign it to
You
Lisa.
usually do assign it to the
Was there an
ones.
outside professional involved
No,
from the
but
rec center?
I still even think it's
Not
a
a hired one,
committee.
because we had the 2 city managers and the attorney, both who were one step removed from the process. They're not actually board members or involved or hired by, so in essence, yes.
But they wouldn't
they
be
were-
candidates for us.
That they were volunteering their services. We weren't hiring them as a headhunter, say, but they were giving us a perspective.
But they wouldn't be
I will
candidates
say,
for us.
I will say too, though, the thing that surprised me maybe the most is how you will get a lot of interest and you'll get a lot of applications, but it's pretty clear and straightforward, and it narrows down pretty quick. I guess my point is the top candidates, the cream of the crop really rises to the top on its own, and you see it. So just by those staff members that were helping us go through the paper applications, we got down to 10. And then the subcommittee, just a few members of the subcommittee interviewed the 10, and then there were a remaining 3 to go to the board. And then one of the 3 dropped out. And so then the next one down was like a 4, but it was way down past, and so we bumped him up. But that top candidate really rose himself up very naturally through the process. So my point is I think that if you establish a decent process, the candidates end up speaking for themselves, and we don't have to stress so much about the process because the candidates will just rise to the top.
I think the process through the rec center went through. I mean, obviously, your board is made up of you and the mayors of the cities that that are involved with the rec center. So you had a good board making decisions. I can also, I mean, this is important enough to me that these 5 mayors I talked to, I can have them put down in writing for me the process each one of them went through.
That would be really helpful.
Within their cities.
That would be really
That
helpful.
would be great. I would like that. I
That we could
appreciate
hybrid
that.
something out of
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
As far as the number of candidates, Tammy, to me, honestly, we've all talked about this in different ways, but from a public standpoint, this could be the most critical decision we make for at least the next 3.5 to 7 years, right?
Absolutely.
So as that goes, I think that the number of candidates that the full city council should see and vote on should be more than 3. I think that number should be no less than 6. It's 3, I may not be able to see the differences between the candidates at that number, so I would like that to be a bigger number coming before the full council.
We're all in agreement on somewhere between 3 and 6. I mean, I'm glad we're all feeling that we don't have to interview 50.
No,
So,
it would be counterproductive, but
Yeah.
there should be at least statistically significant number of final candidates hitting the council.
Does it make sense if we're looking for an HR-oriented professional, since we have, and I don't know how big Hogan is as a company, but we have MTC as our largest corporate citizen?
That's an interesting idea.
Would it be worth talking to the head HR person at MTC to see if that person would be willing and a reasonable candidate to participate as the professional on our process?
That's a really interesting idea, considering that they staff a lot of federal projects. They might have some insight that could be useful. I mean, if they'll do it, that sounds like it would be.
I don't know that they would do it, but I mean,
Yeah.
is there another large enough entity? You know what? Not that it's as good a fit, but the other fairly large employer that we have in town is DI.
Mhm.
I wonder if there is an HR person there that might have the skills to bring that function to our committee. And then the question is there, am I missing anyone? I mean, a Target or a Home Depot isn't going to have that kind of person, even though they're fairly, they got a large presence here. Walmart isn't going to have that kind of a person here. Dick's is not. Are there any other corporate citizens that would likely have an HR professional of that level that we know here? Or do any of us happen to know an HR professional who is a resident in town?
I'll just say something here. I love creative problem solving, and so I'm grooving what you're doing, don't get me wrong. I would definitely want to push pause on that idea and have Lisa think about it. And also, again, with the experience that I had with the rec district, I was really surprised at how adamant the professionals were that the private sphere and the public sphere are so different. Because I was pushing for, let's open it up to not just MPAs, not just, masters of rec, but MBAs and people with experience in the private sector, because I like to get that private perspective. But they convinced me quite strongly and clearly that there's just enough of the day in and day out that is different in the public versus private, that there's quite a distinction there. And so it would be an interesting question as to whether or not that would be helpful or maybe not so.
The one other asset that we have in town is Roger
Two.
from the league. We
That's interesting, yeah.
We might think about tapping him for that committee.
So the problem we run into is maximum size of a panel. Its efficiency goes down exponentially the larger it gets.
Yeah. Sure.
So we'd have to figure out what that number is if we're seriously considering department heads. And I like the idea of an interested third-party resident or corporate citizen, city manager, other professional.
I'm not thinking all of those, I'm thinking one or maybe two of those.
Sure.
Only, but I'm trying to come up with some candidates where we might find that person as opposed to.
It's my personal experience has been when an interviewing panel gets large, you could screen with one or two, but when you get to like a first round interview panel, if it gets more than 6 or 7 people in the room, you lose control of the interview, and it just doesn't. 5 is a good number.
5's a good number, I think.
I don't, any higher than that, you really run the risk of walking over one of the people who need to ask questions, or somebody takes you down a tangent and you run out of time.
5 tops, yeah, I agree.
So do you know people at MTC, Mayor? I do not.
I know somebody, and I almost think they're in the HR department.
I met with Scott Marquardt, their president, for about a half hour after their incident.
So would you feel comfortable asking him that
Yeah,
question?
yeah, he gave me his card, and that's the first time we'd met, but we got, we had a good discussion, and so, yeah, I could.
So I think we can get
Call 'em
both,
up
like
anytime.
Tammy's suggestion is we can gauge interest, right? Ask
Sure,
them if
that's
they're
what
interested.
at this point, we're looking for volunteers as opposed to finally staffing the committee.
Yeah, and I do think if you're just looking at a 5-member committee, I would suggest you stick with people with municipal experience or public sector. I mean, I think Roger too is a good idea. He's seen a lot, worked with a lot, understands.
Go ahead.
Roger too would do it in a heartbeat. He'd talk
I
to
think
me
I
all the
misunderstood,
time,
though.
like,
I would say, I don't think the subcommittee needs to necessarily be limited to 5. I think that then there can be only a handful of the subcommittee who does the first round of interviews. The interviewing needs to be smaller.
Well,
The subcommittee doesn't
sure, but even then, the
necessarily
subcommittee
need to
that
be
reaches diminishing returns above a certain amount.
Yeah.
In an interview, I wouldn't go any more than 5. I wouldn't take a committee more than like 7 people.
smaller. Yeah,
to get-
7, 8 tops.
Yeah, it just drops off really fast.
Interviewing 4 or 5, yeah, for that
Yeah.
first round.
But
I think for efficiency and consistency, just having the subcommittee be one subcommittee is the best, whether it's 5 or 6 people, and then ultimately, as you said, deciding how many come up to the council. It might be that the committee says, hey, we want to send you 8, or.
yeah, if they have 8 that they would back.
It doesn't sound like it's going to be 8, but.
It doesn't need to be a hard and fast number, but I'm sure the committee will weed that down to a potential. And to that point, Bill, whether it's 1 or 2, it could be 1 council member on the initial committee.
Sure.
It doesn't need to be staffed much, because we're going to get the second round anyway. As long as whoever's on that committee can report back to the rest of the council that they think the process is unbiased and fair, and that the committee is actually functioning, I think that's really what
And
the
that we're
role of a
moving
council member
along
should be.
and firsthand progress reports.
Yeah, because if we're in there as a council member, basically saying, throw this one out, then we're shorting out the rest of the council. I think it's a report role more than anything else for that member.
So, I mean, I'm happy to help with the sample processing, or, if the mayor has some input, and maybe Tammy on what we did with the rec district, and if anybody else wants to be part of this initial coming up with a draft process that comes back to the city council.
Can we have it on next time's agenda, though?
No.
Because the mayor, didn't you say that it took them about 4 months?
Right, but we have till the end of
March.
Of March, but we'd like to have a
They-
little bit of overlap,
They started out 3 to 4
or
months.
at least the possibility of a little bit, couple weeks of
Steve.
overlap. And if we don't count December, we're starting.
Steve said that he would be really very available, and that's another thing that ended up surprising me, but I really switched my view on that.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that, at first I was like, oh, we definitely want overlap. We've got to hurry this process and make sure there's this as long as possible overlap. As we went through the process, we actually all changed our mind to the point that it's maybe harmful to get the old view onto the new person, and maybe more let the new person jump in, but have the old person available for answer any questions.
That's a good idea.
Steve won't be offended either way. I've talked with him, and he understands that, hey, if we want him to help have some overlap, great. But he also said to me, I understand the new person coming in, not wanting me looking over his shoulder, he or she's shoulder, so,
Well, I guess we can try to hit for the next one, but what?
Well,
the next-
if we, just using the same math that we've talked about here, if we back that up, we really have to have the procedure down, committee selected, and advertising for this
Advertised
position in
November
November,
1.
right?
Well, I don't know. It depends how far out. I mean, sometimes you string it out too long, so you want to look at, there's a set time frame, and I think we can look at others, but.
Sure, but if we offer to somebody who, say, comes in from back east in February, we say we need you here March, that could be a little time too short for them to wind down, so I'd be concerned about that as well, so.
Yeah, I think 30-day notice is typical.
Well, I think,
Well, I'll get written responses from these other mayors,
Tammy, yeah.
go through their processes. I'll take that assignment on.
And Tammy, do you have time in the next 2 weeks to do something more specific about the process that the rec district used and who was on their committee and
Sure, you
some
bet.
of the timeframes of
Yeah, time frame is a key
advertising?
thing, and I agree with Lisa's last point that sometimes you don't want it to drag out too long.
Yeah.
Because
You-
there's just a certain amount of time. You put it out there, you close it by this date, you then go da-da-da. And we were able to be pretty concise.
Right, and although the feedback I've heard from that process, and it is the conciseness that created the impression of bias. That came back to me from several sources on the rec district specifically. So I want to avoid that by making sure our window of opportunity is enough that people who want to apply for the posting can apply for the posting.
Yeah.
When you bring it up for 3 days and you're starting on a weekend and then you're closing it Tuesday, bias is implied, so we have to be careful about
Well,
that.
what I've read on the ICMA, they recommend a 4-week noticing advertising.
So if it's 4-week noticing and advertising, do we really need more than a couple months before that 4 weeks?
Well,
problem is
we'll
if
bring
you
you back
start-
a timeline.
We'll do that, we'll talk
Yeah,
about that next
timeline.
week, next
Yeah.
time.
if you
Okay.
start January
Well,
1.
December doesn't count.
If you start January 1, you don't have the timeline, so you've almost got to start. You could say November 15 to December 15 for
Right.
your
Yeah.
advertising.
Yeah, it is difficult with the holidays. I think we're going to have to,
That's going to
ours
throw.
may be extended or truncated if we say, no, we're just going to start in January. We're going to, avoid all the holidays and start in January, but.
But then if you're 4-week posting, in your February before you're starting your initial selection, depending on how much time and effort you can get the committee to apply,
A 1-month selection, yeah.
1 month selection, then you're really getting close.
1-month selection and
Yeah.
1-month noticing.
Yeah, so it could work, it'd be a photo finish, so.
Yeah, it would be tight.
And I'm also curious when Farmington is doing theirs. It's going to be interesting.
When is Farmington's retirement?
We don't necessarily want to be noticing it exactly the same time.
I'll have to check with Mayor Talbot, but it's got to be soon because they had the candidates in right now.
Okay,
So they're close to done.
Yeah.
October, November.
Yeah, because I joked with them and said, hey, do you want to give us some good candidates that you don't hire? Make it a lot easier for me.
You know what?
So yeah, we're not going to be in there.
We're not going to be overlapping.
No.
That was, I think, what
Okay.
you were talking
Good.
about.
All right, we'll bring you something. It may not be complete, but we'll try to bring you something next time.
All right, any reason for a closed meeting? Anyone?
Don't think so.
I don't have any appointments to boards or committees, but I will next time, a whole bunch of them. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.
Maybe somebody for the rec district.